I am pleased to introduce David Bevington, the Phyllis Horton Distinguished Service Professor Emeritus in the Humanities, Professor in the Departments of English and Comparative Literature, and Chair of Theater and Performance Studies. A noted scholar of Shakespeare, Bevington is also Senior Editor of the Norton Anthology of Renaissance Drama and the forthcoming Complete Works of Ben Jonson. A beloved teacher, Bevington has been at the university since 1967, and in 1979, he received the Quantrell Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching, an award nominated by students from the college. According to a 2007 article in the Chicago Chronicle, his classes were so popular that students would camp on the quads to ensure a spot in them. So we are certainly in for a treat tonight. Please join me in welcoming David Bevington.
Thank you, Madeline. That was lovely. And I'm deeply honored to be here. Grateful for all of us who helped make this arrangement possible. Yes, I'm delighted with these Harper lectures. I gather they're going up a step to make them more available online and so on, and we're participating in that tonight. So I thought I would talk with you about love and friendship in Hamlet as a kind of a sample of the kinds of, I hope, the kind of close reading and textual analysis that we love to do at the University of Chicago. I've been teaching Shakespeare there since 1967. And taught before that at the University of Virginia for 6 years, so it goes back a ways. To place the subject in terms of Hamlet, I'd like to talk just a moment about where it stands in terms of the Shakespeare's corpus. It's about almost exactly halfway through. He started writing about 1590. When he was 64, he was about 29 or 30, and had just arrived in London. He was married, although he didn't bring his wife down to London to live with him. We don't know exactly how he got started in the theater, but he obviously loved the theater and started writing plays like The Comedy of Errors, Two Gentlemen of Verona, Henry VI, Part 1, plays that we don't know exactly where they were produced or by what company or what people thought about him. It wasn't until about 1592 that he began to attract notice, but he quickly became very well known indeed. By 1594, he joined what quickly became the leading acting company in London, the Lord Chamberlain's Company, sponsored by the Lord Chamberlain. Richard Burbage was his leading actor and remained so throughout Shakespeare's lifetime and on, in fact, past Shakespeare's own retirement and death. They had a very long, essentially a lifetime collaboration together. And some of the other actors in the company also extraordinarily stable outfit. They were the top company when King James came to the throne in 1603. They became the King's Men because there was an acknowledgement that they were number one on the London scene, and that was a great success. Well, that just a couple of years before that, around 1599, 1600, is about halfway through Shakespeare's career, and that's when we encounter Hamlet. It may have been one of the earliest plays in the Globe Theatre, which his company had built. In 1599, when they were essentially had landlord problems before. They were in a place called the Theatre because the building had been put up before and was the only theatre space used for professional theatre in London for quite a while. And Shakespeare and his company performed a lot of Shakespeare's early plays there. But in 1599, around the time of As You Like It, of Julius Caesar, and also importantly Hamlet, they encountered landlord difficulties and moved the building, basically. Apparently did so in the winter. They may have, one theory is that they actually slid the timbers across the Thames, which was deeply frozen. It was a very cold winter that year. And set up on where the new Globe is now located on the bankside, the South Shore. The building must have been very much the same as the theater they were in before, because they put the timbers back together in the same way. The house, all the timbers were hand-hewn and hand-fitted. They had tongue and groove connections and so on. You couldn't just put them in a different order, so they actually reassembled the house, as far as we can tell, with all the timbers being in exactly the same spot. That obviously gave them opportunity also for changing some things that could be a little better on the stage, but the house itself was basically the house they had known for some time. So and then Shakespeare wrote for another 10 or 12 years till he retired. So Hamlet comes right at the halfway point, and it's a number of fascinating ways. Up to that point, he'd been mainly writing romantic comedies, The Taming of the Shrew, Midsummer Night's Dream, Much Ado About Nothing, As You Like It, Twelfth Night, wonderful succession of romantic comedies, about one every year, and also writing one English history play, more or less once every year, with the Henry VI plays and Richard III, and on into the reign of Henry IV, Richard II, Henry IV, Henry V, ending with Henry V, which is also a play of 1599, this turning point when they were, Henry V may well have been one of the first plays put on in the new globe. At that point, for reasons that one can only sort of guess at, because Shakespeare doesn't talk about it, he stopped writing English history plays for over a decade, and he stopped writing English romantic comedies too. He turned instead to Troilus and Cressida, which is an extremely problematic, difficult sort of black comedy play or whatever it is, containing the death of Hector, for example, or problem plays like Measure for Measure, which is a comedy, but obviously immensely complicated what to make of its tangled moral sense. And he started writing tragedies with Julius Caesar in 1599, Hamlet very shortly thereafter, on to Othello, King Lear, Macbeth, an astonishing series of successions, and Antony and Cleopatra, and on to Coriolanus and Timon of Athens and so on, and then the romances he comes back to at the end of his life. But he does, this midpoint divides the earlier romantic comedies and history plays up from the one hand, the period of the great problem plays and the great tragedies. And it's interesting that Hamlet comes so early in that succession. So it seems to me that this phenomenon of love and friendship comes down in a very interesting way on that division. The earlier romantic comedies generally end with Parade to the Altar. One, think of Twelfth Night or As You Like It, a succession of marriages at the end, Midsummer Night's Dream's the same way. And so all the wonderful complications of young people feeling awkward about each other and misunderstandings that go on with love relationships and so on are ultimately ironed out, and we understand that being happily ever after. The history plays also come to a triumphant conclusion with Henry V, one of the great predecessor kings and so on, and a sense that Shakespeare really had made his final statement about the nature of monarchy, the idea of England being proud of its own historical achievement, its victory over this Spanish Armada in 1588. So there was a kind of an upbeat period during the last years of Queen Elizabeth, and although she was aging and there were deep anxieties about that, she hadn't named her successor, but it still was a period in which Shakespeare was able to write plays for an audience that really deeply appreciated these upbeat perceptions as they liked it, you might say. And he wrote a play, of course, As They Like It. It's one of the plays from that period. Then all of a sudden there are these darker plays, Julius Caesar, Hamlet, and what to make of that. Now, think that in terms of love, romantic love. In Hamlet, we have a romantic love situation, but it's a train wreck. He falls out with Ophelia. She's under her father's instructions to return all her love letters and so on to Hamlet. He blows up at her in one of the most painful scenes that he'd written up to that point, saying, "Get thee to a nunnery. Why wouldst thou be a breeder of sinners?" So on. A great deal of misanthropy and misogyny in that play. And of course, a lot of it is also directed at his mother, who has distressed Hamlet mortally by marrying the hated uncle, and whom Hamlet can't get along with. And we shortly discover their reasons why not, because his uncle has murdered his father. So the whole Oedipal crisis and so on bespeaks the sense in which love relationships have become deeply problematized. I would want to argue that Hamlet ultimately makes it up to with his mother and wants to sort of bring her back what he sees as the abyss of behaving in a very sinful way, and perhaps manages to do so. But that's not the same as sort of romantic happiness, right? And Ophelia's gone. I mean, of course, she ends up going mad, and then she's dead, and Hamlet and Laertes quarreling with each other, fighting each other over Ophelia's grave. Hamlet does say, "I loved Ophelia more than 20,000 brothers," and so on. But that's not the same as a kind of a happy romantic ending. So what has happened? And by the same token, friendship becomes valorized in a way that is much more important than it used to be, in part because romantic happiness seems to have failed, so that the image finally, especially of Hamlet's deep and abiding friendship with Horatio, is seen in this play as one of the places where he can really feel he can count on human experience and have obviously a loving relationship, but one that is not heterosexual romantic comedy. A lot of the sonnets are seemingly written about this same period, and that raises complicated issues also of a young man expressing deep affection for a young male aristocrat, and the love situation in the sonnets is problematic. Toward the end of the series, he encounters this famous dark lady. We don't know if this is autobiographical or not, but a lot of people speculate that it was. And if so, it's a story in which a young woman is taken away by his best friend, but even when he achieves sexual consummation with the dark lady, he hates himself for it. He considers sexuality loathsome, and he's just ashamed of his own performance, as it were. So people have wondered about this. Of course, is something happened in Shakespeare's life that might have turned things around this way. It's hard to find any clear indication of autobiographical events that would have triggered such a change. Was it had to do with something at the end of the reign of Queen Elizabeth and the becoming to King James? Well, that hadn't happened yet in 1601 or thereabouts. It was 1603 when he showed up. But there was perhaps a kind of fin de siècle, a sense of anxiety during the last years of Elizabeth. Is that possible? There was the attempted rebellion of the Earl of Essex against Queen Elizabeth, which was put down. Shakespeare's company was involved in that. They were asked to put on a play about Richard II. Shakespeare's own play of Richard II. They did a revival, paid for by Essex men, and it was very unfortunate for the company because, of course, it's a picture about how a ruler is overcome in a coup d'etat. And the authorities, they were on the carpet about this. The authorities wanted to know whether Shakespeare's company had something in mind by putting on a play on such a dangerous, toxic subject. And their answer, of course, had to be, there's nobody here but us chickens, right? We're paid to put on plays. That's our business. And somebody came. So it was a very, very problematic time that way. And around I guess more in favor of the theory that Shakespeare just is changing genres. It may have had something to do with the zeitgeist as well, but that you feel with Henry V that he's really reached the acme of his achievement in the English historical play. And the same is true of Twelfth Night and As You Like It. Even the titles of those plays suggest that he's done it now. There's Much Ado About Nothing, there's As You Like It, and then there's Twelfth Night, the subtitle of which is What You Will. So the kind of throwaway titles suggesting that it was effortless grace. He's arrived with romantic comedy, and having done that, where is he to go after writing Twelfth Night? So you don't get any more romantic comedies of that sort. So he tries something which he experimented very hesitatingly with Titus Andronicus very early on, and a tragedy, but one that is quite unlike anything he wrote later on. And it's very much a study play that is going back to Roman history and imitating other people who've written plays in this genre. There's Romeo and Juliet, which is an absolutely wonderful play, of course, but the first half of it is almost a comedy. It was so delightful, Romeo in love with Rosaline and then meeting Juliet. It's a great love story and so on. You almost wish it would end happily instead of going in the direction of tragedy. He hadn't really found his métier in writing tragedy, and still he starts with Julius Caesar, Hamlet, and so on. And then, wow, I mean, that's incredible, one after another. Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, Macbeth, that's a pretty good record. So what was it that changed? Well, to go back to how love and friendship fits into that. Let me begin by this part of the topic by reading a bit of Hamlet's view about friendship in this play. We can't say with any certainty that this is the way Shakespeare felt about it, but there's such a strong indication. It comes up particularly when Hamlet is about to put on the play within the play. for Claudius and Gertrude, and the players have just arrived in Ensenor Castle. He knows them, they're old friends. He recognizes the chief player, and he knows the boy actor who's with the company, and so on. He jokes to the boy actor, but is your voice changing? And you're taller than when I saw you last, and so on. Clearly very familiar with them. In fact, it's clear that Hamlet loves theater. And now this is his opportunity to test Claudius by putting on a play that will somewhat resemble the situation of his father's murder. If you remember, he complicates that in a nice way by suggesting to the player king that as they're preparing to do this, is you could, for a need, study a passage, some 16 or a dozen or 16 lines that I would set down for you to memorize and put in your player actor king. So of course we'll do that, that's our business. And presumably they do so. Now, one of the great puzzles in studying Hamlet, thinking about that, is what portion of the presentation, the play within the play, is what Hamlet wrote on that occasion. We'll come back to that in a moment. But at the moment, what I want to talk about is the conversation he has with Horatio. Horatio, of course, has been there since the start of the play. He comes on in the fourth scene, it comes on in the first scene, excuse me, to be with the members of the guard. And they invite him because he's a gentleman and he speaks Latin, and therefore he can talk to a ghost. And he attempts to do so, but the ghost evades him. Horatio sees the point that he's being urged to bring Hamlet, and that happens by the fourth scene of the play. Hamlet comes along too in this very cold night on the battlements of the castle, and the ghost does appear. Horatio, in the meanwhile, there's been a very interesting colloquy between the two of them about the whole issue of faith and skepticism. It's an interesting answer to the question, why does Shakespeare bring in Horatio in such an important role? It's not in Shakespeare's sources that Horatio is entirely an invented character. From the very start, he's a skeptic. He comes on, the people on watch have seen this ghost 2 or 3 nights now, and they've brought him along because they want to have him talk to the ghost and so on, also to verify their experiment, which they don't know what to make of this. They're terribly afraid about the whole situation. And his response is to say, tush, tush, 'twill not appear. This isn't going to happen, you've made this up, and so on. Then, of course, the ghost does appear. And his response to that is to say, I would not this have believed without the sensible avouch of mine own eyes. Wonderful line, isn't it? So he comes across as almost a kind of a scientist, an inductive, a person who wants evidence. He wants to see things and be able to touch things. And in back of that, by the way, I think is the story from the New Testament about doubting Thomas. After the resurrection, Christ comes back and his disciples, and one of them, Thomas, asks if he can touch Christ's wounds. And Christ says, yes, of course you may do that. And then he says, in effect, that's fine, wonderful that you want to do that, but blessed are those who do not see and yet believe, and defines belief as belief in the impossible and the unseen. So that right from the start, the play is crossing that interesting balance between faith and reasonable investigation. And it's very useful, I think, in the course of the play to have Horatio fill this role of the skeptic, because this is the skeptic who's then convinced, well, if I've seen a ghost, I guess I have to say I saw a ghost. But even there, he and Hamlet are concerned about various other possibilities. The ghost could be a spirit, a devil, who is coming in that guise to tempt Hamlet to some sort of dangerous extension of himself. So they still have to test the thing out. And that's one of the reasons, of course, having the play within the play. In the course of all that discussion between Hamlet and Horatio, when, again, Horatio's been expressing his a doubt, although agreeing he really did see the ghost, Hamlet says, Horatio, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. And your philosophy is one phrase. It means not just you, but you people. And whole philosophy here means natural scientists as well as anybody who's studying the natural world. You natural science people, so on. You want to test every piece of evidence and so on. Let me tell you that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. So that's very nice. We surmise from this that Hamlet and Horatio have, we're told that they have had wonderful discussions at Wittenberg with their students together, so actually sort of graduate students, I guess. They're not enrolled in any course so far as we know. After all, this is the Prince of Denmark, but they are both studying there at Wittenberg, famous name, of course, isn't it? It's connected with the beginning of the Reformation in Europe, and there they have obviously been talking late in the night with each other. It's a wonderful kind of friendship where they trust and love each other, but they enjoy the difference. They enjoy trying to persuade each other. They learn from each other. They're open to suggestion, but they're also holding on to their position and so on. Hamlet very strongly, from the beginning, taking the view that Horatio, it's wonderful to have somebody who's a skeptic like that, but he has something to learn on the other side of this issue. Now that comes up in Act 3, Scene 2, as they're about to put on the play within the play before Claudius and Gertrude in the court. Hamlet has talked to the players as they're getting ready to go about it. Learn how to do this properly. Don't wave your hands around in the air. Don't overact and so on. It's a wonderful little discussion from Hamlet's point of view of how to be a good actor, and also what drama is. And he says about that score, he says that this is the purpose of playing was and is to hold the mirror up to nature, to show virtue his feature, score in her own image, and the very age and body of the time his form and pressure. It's basically sort of Aristotelian, although I think, in fact, Shakespeare doesn't seem to have learned that from reading Aristotle. There's no evidence that he did. He knew the name. He mentions it a couple of times. Only twice in the whole corpus has the name of Aristotle come up. But this was in the air, that idea of drama as mimesis, and showing us a picture of ourselves in this heightened sense that is so important to our sense of who we are and to our culture. So that's the reason he wants to have these actors do a thing well and not overact. And beneath this, too, is the notion that a really good play can do a remarkable thing, which is to test the conscience of a person in the audience. That if Claudius is shown a representation, a mimesis, that's what a play does. It doesn't give you an exact picture, it's not a photograph, but it is something close enough in its resemblance that, and especially since other people don't know that Claudius has killed his brother and assumed the kingship this way, that he will give himself away. He will be so moved by that and so distressed that he will not be able to stand looking at that representation. Isn't that a lovely idealistic picture of the importance of drama? So parenthetically, I'm not sure I think that I know that that's true. I think there are a lot of people who can go to see plays and remain remarkably unmoved about their crimes. True of Al Capone, for example. He loved going to opera, Pagliacci and so on. He'd sit there weeping buckets of tears, but it's not because they reminded him of his guiltiness. He just loved this Italian melodrama. But this is a very heightened view about drama, that it actually could help detect criminality. And what's more, they try this out, and that's what happens, right? They put on the play within the play. The king gets up and stalks out and so on, and Hamlet says to Horatio, I trust the ghost's word for £1,000. And they both agree that they have seen convincing evidence that he is guilty. Now that's very important. So Hamlet has relied on Horatio to help him determine the guilt of the king. He has told Horatio about what he's learned from his father about the murder, and he doesn't tell anybody else. So he has one friend on whom he relies with this obviously critical piece of information, because he wants to have Horatio's help in trying to sort this out. Now, why would he have chosen Horatio? And he speaks about that as the play is about to go on. This is what he says. In a kind of aside, just waiting for the play to start, he says, "What ho, Horatio, here, sweet lord, at your service. Horatio, thou art even as just a man as ever my conversation coped withal." Horatio says, "Oh, my dear lord, please don't embarrass me. Why, I've done nothing." Hamlet won't have that. He says, "Nay, do not think I flatter. For what advancement may I hope from thee, that no revenue hast but thy good spirits to feed and clothe thee? Why should the poor be flattered? No, let the candid tongue lick absurd pomp, and crook the pregnant hinges of the knee, where thrift may follow fawning. Dost thou hear? Since my dear soul was mistress of her choice, and could have not distinguished her election, she hath sealed thee for herself. For thou hast been as one in suffering all that suffers nothing, a man whose fortune's buffets and reward has taken with equal thanks. And blessed are those whose blood and judgment are so well committed that they are not a pipe for fortune's finger to sound what stop she please. Give me that man that is not passion's slave, and I will wear him in my heart's heart, I in my heart of heart, as I do thee. And then I think a little embarrassed by what he said, which is not saying, I love you, right? He says something too much of this. And they changed the topic. They go back saying, now the play's going to go on. I want you to watch. We'll get together and compare notes. But the rather lengthy pause on the idea of Hamlet's, he's had all this difficulty with Ophelia. She's returned his letter. That's over. He's disgusted with his mother's behavior. It's distress about his father's having been murdered, of course, and he doesn't know what he's supposed to do about that. He's got Horatio. And it's interesting to see how it's defined. It's defined, first of all, in terms of disinterestedness. This is a problem, of course, anybody who belongs to a royal family or has a position of extraordinary wealth or in a corporation or wherever else. If you have a lot of money to dispense, a lot of power, it's very hard to sort out who are the people who are really coming at you for some purpose of their own, or whether the relationship is entirely disinterested. And Hamlet consents, and I think we have to see that in the play. There's every evidence that that's true. That Horatio, we don't know exactly what his social status is, but he's a gentleman, and he's not on a sort of ladder towards success at court. There have been fellow students in a way, and that, of course, makes an interesting comparison with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, doesn't it, where they apparently knew each other sort of in high school, as it were, back in the old days. And Hamlet quickly learns to distrust them. Not that they weren't great buddies and they have nice things to talk about and so on. And he really likes their company. At first, he longs for their company because he is feeling very lonely and nobody to talk to and so on. But he quickly worms out of them. At least it said in their behalf that they're not good liars. And he was able to determine, you were sent for, weren't you? And they say, yes, we were, we have to admit. And it goes on from there. So that just makes an important difference. He talks to them. Things are going okay for a while, but that makes, and of course we know with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern that they were brought in on circumstances that are not self-evidently criminal or corrupted, right? The king has summoned them and said, you've known Hamlet when he's a younger person. He's behaving very strangely. This is very upsetting. It's even a bit of a worry in terms of sort of security issues and so on. If you could talk to him and find out if there's something that's bothering him, come back and tell us, and that'll help enable us to know what to do about it. Now, that as a proposition is a very reasonable one, isn't it, don't you think? And they're loyal subjects. And one of the things that operates at this point is that Elizabethans believed very strongly, of course, that you should owe obedience to a monarch. They don't know, of course, that Claudius has killed his brother to reach the kingship. They do know that, in fact, he appears to be a very capable administrator. He handles the diplomatic situation with the threatened invasion from Norway with great aplomb, calls off the dogs of young Fortinbras and saves the situation that way. He's a good politician. He's the sort of person who drops names in everything he says. We're talking to Laertes. Laertes is there to get a permission to leave, go back to Paris and so on. And Claudius drops the name of Laertes about 6 times in one long speech to Laertes about why wouldst thou do Laertes that would not be my giving and not thy asking. He also, the thing about Claudius in that relationship, he understands how horse trading is involved in being a capable administrator and so on. He's obviously beholden to Polonius for support, and at this critical moment when he's assumed the kingship and has some things to explain, like the hasty marriage and so on. Obviously, Polonius thinks that Claudius is a very good choice. There was an election. It was an election in the sense of a few electors, of course, not a popular election, but electors more or less analogous to the election of the Papal College, a group of highly placed people in the organization would choose, and they've chosen him. But Claudius picked a good time to kill his brother when Hamlet was way off in Wittenberg, and it would take months or perhaps, or weeks at least, to bring him back. And meanwhile, evidently Claudius has gone around lining things up so that he'll win the election, which he does. And he does that. We sense how he does that, right? So you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. That's what he says to Polonius about this fairly simple matter about giving an exit visa for Laertes. He said, well, he says to Laertes, your father is absolutely instrumental to everything that I depend upon. I really need him as my leading man. What wouldn't I do for him when he's done so much for me? And the same with you, Laertes, right? You've been a good supporter, and I want to give you this. So he holds these cards in his hand to handle things out, sort of like LBJ, just very good at that kind of horse trading and back scratching. And one of the things, by the way, that's interesting about that, he's obviously compared implicitly with the former king, Hamlet's father, who was portrayed in a very different kind of public figure, right? He was a king who was a warrior, who appears in complete armor, who smote the sledded poleaxe on the ice, who engaged in a duel with the king of Norway, in which the terms were, if you win, you take Denmark. If I win, I get Norway. Think of that as a diplomatic proposition and so on. If we really were trying to do that today, we'd go crazy to have it depend on one person and his strong right arm. But this is calling up that old idea of the Vikings, right? Of a world now disappeared in which men were giants and stood tall in the saddle. And we've lost that, and now we have politicians instead, like Claudius. Very interesting transition. And Shakespeare, I think, sympathetically sees the pluses and minuses above these two arrangements. Anyway, we now have a smooth politician named Claudius, and Polonius thinks he's terrific, and so on. So things are going very well in those terms at court. Hamlet hates it. He doesn't like politicians. And that's another way in which, say, compared with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern or Polonius or all the other figures in the play and so on, Horatio is someone, they relate in terms of not any kind of back scratching. They have studied together at the university. They so much agree that they can disagree and it doesn't hurt their relationship. They love to argue about these things. And so, to go back to the speech, that's what he's saying, first of all. What advancement may I hope from thee, that no venue hast but thy good spirits to feed and clothe thee? Let the candied tongue lift absurd pomp and crook the pregnant hinges of the knee where thrift may follow fawning. Let other people practice the business of kissing up and making profoundly self-humbling gestures. We don't need that, do we? I'd rather have you. And then he goes on to define that. So, first of all, said, somehow my soul has made you the one choice, one friend. She has sealed thee for herself. And then he defines this in terms of the following. Thou hast been one in suffering all that suffers nothing. That a man whose fortunes, buffets, and rewards is taken with equal thanks. Now that's, can arguably be described as a kind of a thumbnail sketch of Stoicism. Roman Stoicism, which Shakespeare, I think, was knowledgeably aware of what it was all about. And it's a nice full definition. We tend today to talk about Stoicism as when the going gets tough, the tough gets going, sort of thing that John Mitchell would talk about, for example, right? I think he was quoting that way back in his day. And so you admire people who are gyranes, who are tough, who stand up to adversity and never back down. But that's a very one-sided definition of Stoicism, very sort of, for us, a kind of contemporary one and a highly political one, I would say. The other side of it is lost track of, which is that to be a good Stoic, you must be indifferent to the rewards of fortune, not only the buffets of fortune, but the rewards of fortune, right? You must not pin your hopes on the thought that Lady Fortuna, who is, of course, notoriously fickle and loves to play games of setting you up and then cutting you off at the knees, that what we want is to have a person who sees that those rewards are unimportant in the first place. If you don't wait on Lady Fortune for good fortune, if you're not pinning your hopes on becoming rich or powerful or whatever else it is, then you can't be disappointed. And it's a wonderful idea. We're willing to renounce worldly aspiration as destructive. So tying together some Christian ideas along with this sort of Roman concept about Lady Fortune. Good stuff. And Hamlet, now that's interesting. The Hamlet credits Horatio with being like that, and I think quite honestly so, quite correctly. To go on, he says, "Blessed are those whose blood and judgment are so well committed that they are not a pipe for fortune's finger to sound what stop she please. Give me that man that is not passion's slave, and I will wear him in my heart's core, in my heart of heart as I do thee." So that's what Horatio means to someone who is not passion's slave, who has adopted the right attitude both ways about Lady Fortune. One nice thing about this reference to playing on Fortune's pipe picks up, and it's another illustration of what a brilliant poet Shakespeare, as well as a superb dramatist. Shortly after the play within the play, when the king has risen up and has left the scene in distress, and the queen is upset and wants to talk to Hamlet, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern at this point are dispatched to get a hold of Hamlet and find out what is bothering him, that he has behaved in such an erratic way. They all suppose that in some ways he's mad. I don't think he is, but he has said he would put on a mad act, and he certainly has done that. And they feel offended and distressed about all this, and quite properly so, from their perspective. There's a wonderful moment in the third act, a little bit in the third act, after the play within the play, when the king calls them together. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern says, "I don't like this. This is really dangerous. It's a security problem. It's threatening my life. I'm the head of state. We have to protect my life at all costs." They agree. Guildenstern and Rosencrantz agree vociferously. Guildenstern says, "We will ourselves provide. Most holy and religious fear it is to keep those many, many bodies safe that live and feed upon your majesty." Right? Rosencrantz enlarges upon that. He says, "The single and peculiar life is bound with all the strength and armor of the mind to keep itself from annoyance." That is, any individual. In the course of nature, the natural instinct is to protect one's own life. That's just natural. But much more, he says, that spirit upon whose wheel depends the lives of many. If someone is a king, then this is elevated to the nth degree, the importance of protecting that life. "The cease of majesty dies not alone, but like a gulf doth draw what's near it with it, or as a massy wheel fixed on the summit of the highest mount, to whose huge spokes 10,000 lesser things are morticed and adjoined, which when it falls, each small annexment, petty consequence attends the boisterous ruin. Never alone did the king sigh, but with a general groan." So the king is the figure, the head of state, and if he's sick, the country is sick, the nation is sick. The majesty dies not alone. It brings down everything with it. Now, we still feel that. I mean, we still put, as we all know, just immensely important efforts into protecting the life of our chief head of state, and the assassinations that we've experienced and so on have been just incalculably traumatic. So it almost doesn't really depend on the idea of monarchy, does it? It's really the idea of the head of state. So one other thing to say about that, too, what Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are saying there, this is straight out of sermons that these people all heard in churches, where the Anglican Church there were sermons that were required to be read from time to time about a sermon against willful disobedience and rebellion. A piece of propaganda, if you like, but you can see why the state wanted to do this and why the church was willing to cooperate. So the public dogma was exactly this, that it's a matter of holy, reverential need to protect the life of the head of state, and anybody who dares to violate that is committing an offense against God as well as against the state. So my point here is that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are saying something which is completely correct dogma in Elizabethan England. And so, and they obviously believe that, and from their point of view, it's true, right? The problem is, of course, they don't know what Claudius has done. And that changes everything. Hamlet can't tell them because he can't trust them. They're put in an interesting position at the play. They're trying to be friendly to Hamlet, but they end up being on the other side. But sort of if you're not part of the, right, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem, right? Quote of one of the slogans of the sort of black movement in this country a number of years back. And I think that works very beautifully. And then to go back to about the pipe. After the play within the play, when everybody is so upset, Hamlet is approached by Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who've come to tell him, first of all, that he's been summoned to talk to his mother. But then they want to say, what is it that's driving you? I thought we were friends. You're behaving so strangely. And he's very flip with them. He doesn't want to level with them. He just jokes with them. And at one point, he says, oh, there's somebody, one of the actors comes in with a recorder. He says, oh, let me see that recorder. And then he hands it to Guildenstern. He says, would you like to play on this pipe? Guildenstern, my lord, I cannot. I pray you. Believe me, I cannot. I do beseech you. I know no touch of it, my lord. And Hamlet says, it is as easy as lying. Govern these bandages with your tongue and thumb. Give it breath with your mouth, right? And it will discourse most eloquent music. Look, here are the stops, right? And Guildenstern says, but these cannot I command to any utterance of harmony. I know not the skill. Isn't that a perfect metaphor for this? It's because it seems nominally, all you do is put your fingers down on the holes and blow, and you'll hear some beautiful piece of music. We all know that isn't as simple as that. And so Hamlet's playing with that, and the way he sermonizes to them is to say this, why, look you now how unworthy a thing you make of me. You would play upon me. You would seem to know my stops. You would pluck out the heart of my mystery. You would sound me from the lowest note to the top of my compass. And there is much music, excellent voice in this little organ, yet cannot you make it speak. Blood, do you think I am easier to be played on than a pipe? Do what you can, call me what instrument you will, though you can fret me, you cannot play upon me. He's playing on the word fret, of course, in the sense of fret with the musical connotation of putting your fingers down on a keyboard, a fingerboard, but fretting in the sense of irritating also. Hamlet loves that sort of punning. But isn't that a beautiful illustration of, again, about friendship, of the reason he cannot trust them. Now, one of the things that happens remarkably as we get on toward the end of the play has to do again with Hamlet and Horatio. In the Olivier version, this is left out, the Olivier film version, so that we can end with people saying to Hamlet, flights of angels, I guess Horatio says, flights of angels, sing thee to thy rest. What happens in the play instead is that it turns out that Hamlet and Horatio have strikingly and wonderfully different interpretations of what they have witnessed and what the story has just been presenting to them, the story of Hamlet's own life and death. Hamlet turns out in the play to be very much a Christian. It's problematic in certain ways. A good instance of that, when after the play, when he comes across the king at prayer, and the king is trying to pray, and not successfully, because we hear him in soliloquy, we realize he's not able to pray because he's unwilling to give up the things for which he's done this terrible thing, this murder. But he's even Claudius is a good Christian in the sense of knowing what the score is, that you cannot hope to be penitent unless you're willing to give up the things for which you've committed a terrible crime. If you do that, Christ offers salvation to anybody at the 11th hour, like the thief on the cross. But you have to change your life the way St. Paul did, right? And Claudius knows he can't do that. It's a wonderfully painful moment of a king a human being who realizes that he's trapped in his own innate and uncontrollable sinfulness. I think it's basically sort of Calvinist insight into the nature of evil that is just inveterate in him. He is one of the reprobate in Calvinist terms. Hamlet coming behind him, this wonderful moment on stage in the play, knife ready to stab this man, and then he pauses and says, wait a minute, if I were to kill him now, I might send his soul to heaven. That won't do. Now, interestingly, the 19th century left this out entirely. They just couldn't bear the thought of Hamlet, this wonderfully thoughtful, insightful, melancholic, sort of scholarly hero, taking such a vengeful and attitude towards another human being. But of course, it's in the play, and they were wrong to make that kind of assumption about his function in the play. But it at least does speak of this. Hamlet does believe in heaven and hell and so on. It's true about his mother. He wants to bring his mother back from her, what he regards as her sinful behavior of sleeping with this creep and having forgotten her husband and the memory of him so quickly. And I think there's a good case to be made that Hamlet achieves in managing to bring her back. But in the course of this, talking to his mother, right after the play, within the play, after he's killed Polonius, by mistake, of course, because Polonius is listening behind an arras, Hamlet realizes he's made a mistake about that. He has killed the wrong man, understandably, right? At least that's the way I interpret it. He comes into his mother's chambers, prepared to, as he ensures us, prepared to speak words to her, but not to use daggers against her. He hears a man's voice in her room. He's been looking for an opportunity to kill Claudius, he says, when he's not at prayer, but when his soul will be ripe for damnation. This sounds like the right moment. The king's in his mother's bedchamber, as it were. And so he stabs and he gets the wrong man. So what's he to make of that? His interpretation of that is, my argument here will be that this is profoundly Christian. He says, and providential. The way he puts it in Act 4, Scene 3. Act 3, Scene 4, excuse me. He says, pointing to Polonius, who's lying there in a pool of his own blood, he says, as for this same Lord, I do repent, but heaven hath pleased it so to punish me with this and this with me, that I must be their scourge and minister. Punish me with this and this with me. People have puzzled over that a great deal. It's very condensed language. But heaven hath pleased it so. He sees this somehow, this is a part of some sort of providential plan, how to make sense out of this. Well, what he sees, punish me with this, Hamlet sees that he's going to have to suffer the consequences of having killed the wrong person, even if he intended to do what he thought he had to do. And this with me, it means he sees that Polonius is having to pay for his own meddlesomeness, and he got essentially walked into this, dug his own grave, and so the whole thing can be interpreted as a providential act that will have meaning ultimately, which Hamlet can't figure out now, but will eventually, and that I must be their scourge and minister. That a scourge is an interesting term. It means someone, Richard III, for example, is a scourge, someone who is acting as an instrument of a higher power, but not for his own, not virtuously, right? There's a great irony. Richard III is fulfilling the destiny of heaven even when he thinks he's building his own empire. So that's what a scourge is. And Hamlet sees him as something like that. I was acting, trying to do what my father had told me to do and so on, but I will have to be a scourge also. Now, that's his interpretation, and it works out through the rest of the play. He sees the play as his story is depending from this moment. He kills Polonius. That drives Ophelia mad. He has to deal with those consequences. It leads to his being sent to England. And but he manages to escape and come back and so on, sealing the fate of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern in the meantime. And when he's back in England, we see him with Horatio again, importantly with Horatio. Horatio is his great companion, of course, in the last act of the play. And there's wonderful moments when he talks in a providential vein. One is the beginning of the very last long scene of the play, talking to Horatio about his escape when he went from one ship to another with the help of pirates, managed to get back and so on. He remembers that he was not sleeping well. Methought I lay worse than the mutants and the bilboes, he says. Rashly, and praise be rashness for it, let us know our indiscretion sometimes serves us well when our deep plots do pall, and that should learn us there's a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them half we will. Melville, by the way, loved that speech. It's the basis for his wonderful episode of mat weaving in On Board Ship and so on, where he describes how mat weaving is like put together, the warp and the woof of human life. They're the strands that are basically determine the structure of the whole thing, but then the individual sort of the bobbin weaves it and out and makes its own pattern, as it were, on that. But the overall structure is determined. That was Melville's way of sort of summarizing about his interpretation of what his story meant, and going back to Shakespeare for his great model. There is a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them how we will. But you see where he uses the term providence explicitly in that moment. There's a divinity that shapes our ends. And he's talked about providence in the same way. This is talking to with Hamlet. He's preparing what to do at this point now. His father's told him to avenge his father's murder. He's agonized about this. He berates himself for not moving more quickly on this process and so on, even though he sees he's up against a canny enemy. But how's he to work out this revenge? What happens at the end of the play is really kind of a paradox, or almost a kind of a joke, if you like, kind of a cosmic joke. What comes to him is an event that he hadn't planned or hadn't called for. What happens subsequently is he's challenged to a duel with Laertes in the presence of the king, and it's going to be a friendly duel among young men and just for entertainment. He accepts the challenge, which comes to him by way of Osric, and then he says to his friend, "But thou wouldst not know how ill all is here about my heart." And Horatio says, "Well, if that's so, forestall it. You don't have to fight this duel now. Don't do it." Hamlet's answer is, "Not a whit. We defy augury. There is special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not now, it will come. If it is not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all." Wonderful passage, right? "Since no man of aught he leaves knows, what is it to leave betimes? Let be, que sera, sera." Now that's an interesting kind of conclusion, isn't it, for a man who's been berating himself about not doing what his father has asked him to do. Let be. That if it's going to happen, if there's a bullet that has my name on it, it'll be my time, right? It's that kind of, that trivializes is up to put it in those terms, but if it be not now, yet it will come. Be not to now, not to come, it will be now. Be not now, yet it will come. That's his view, and he accepts the duel on benign terms of dueling with Laertes. He knows nothing about Laertes now, having got together with the king to cook up a plot to make sure that Hamlet would be killed with a poisoned sword, or if not, with a backup cup of poisoned wine, right? So that's the way it goes forward into the last moment of the play. And if that's how it works out, Hamlet didn't devise this. He is not conspiring. He is not trying to work out how to get at the king at this point. But in the process, he discovers that he's been attacked by a young man who he thought was someone who could deal with him honestly, and someone who's poisoned a sword, and also it's a sword that's unbaited. It doesn't have a tip on the end of the weapon, as they would have for ordinary friendly duel. So he insists on breaking down that relationship, changing swords and so on, and stabs Laertes, who dies saying, "I am justly killed with my own treachery." Right? And Laertes, too, sees that there's something just and appropriate about this, because he did wrong things. He's a gentleman, but he has lowered himself to conspire with the king to use a underhanded trick of poison and so on. And Laertes sees that he shouldn't have done that. So he asks for forgiveness of Hamlet, and Hamlet agrees with that. They end forgiving each other. But in the process of all this, the king manages to poison his own wife because she takes the poisoned cup. It's almost a joke, isn't it? And but the great joke is that Hamlet, after having berated himself for not knowing what to do, the answer comes to him providentially by means that he could not have devised and has not devised himself. And so his killing Claudius at the end is almost an act of self-defense. It's so much on the spur of the moment. Now, so I'm going to end at this point. That's his providential reading of his own story, and it is definitely in terms of Christian theology. But there's Horatio, his dear friend, who his first move with these terrifying last moments, of course, is to want to kill himself. "I'm more antique Roman than a Dane." He sees that as going back a kind of Stoic model of committing suicide when things have reached a point where there's just no remedy. Hamlet insists, "No, I want you to draw your breath in pain and tell my story." And so Horatio accepts that responsibility. He should live in sorrow. He's the one who is weeping most for Hamlet's death. The others are dead anyway. And leaves Horatio at the end to explain what's happened to Fortinbras, who's come in and so, rather ironically, has ended picking up all the pieces. He'll now be the king of Denmark. But this is what Hamlet says to Fortinbras, and to us, I suppose, by way of explanation of what the story was all about. And it is very much at variance with Hamlet's interpretation. Right? It's not providential. He says, I will tell you to the yet unknowing world how these things came about. So shall you hear of carnal, bloody, and unnatural acts, of accidental judgments, casual slaughters, of deaths put on by cunning and forced cause, and in this upshot, purposes mistook, fallen on the inventors' heads. All this I can truly deliver. This is accidental judgments, casual slaughters, deaths put on by cunning and forced cause, and in the upshot, purposes mistook, fall on the inventors' heads. That's not a bad reading of many of the ingredients of Hamlet, but my point here is that it's a secular Roman historical reading of this account, right? It has no room in it for providential interpretation. It is rather more a story of people sort of digging their own graves and falling into things that they're justly deserved, but there's no deity involved in carving this out. It's just a kind of human existential idea about human vicissitude and change and failure. A kind of a tragic account. So just to end on this note, it seems to me absolutely wonderful in this such a wonderful play. Shakespeare never wrote a better play than this. He ends without letting us know what he thinks as to which of these two readings is the right one, right? He loves drama, and you're left with, well, I guess there's something to be said about both of these. But you see, again, it goes back to where their friendship started, the way it's always been. He's the skeptic, the historian, the secular figure, and Shakespeare, always the one who's saying there's more things in heaven and earth that are dreamt of in your philosophy. And we're left at the end of this play to grieve about the events and also to try to sort out that extremely difficult question and to come to the conclusion that we don't really know. So thank you all very much.